Devil dropped the gavel on that little coastal town.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Trial Watchers. This is a podcast about true crime fans and for true crime fans. My name is Mike Pachenik, and joining me is my lovely co-host, Melissa Gordon. Mel, how are you?
Doing great. How are you?
Doing well. Great to see you. And we got a great episode today. But before we dive in, a couple housekeeping issues. If you're catching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe to our page. Also go to trialwatchers.com. There you can learn about how to buy our book, as well as how to sign up for the Trial Watchers Crew, our Patreon page, where we will be releasing great true crime content for our audience every week, pretty much every day of every week, it feels like lately. And you'll have an opportunity to join our exclusive club there. So trialwatchers.com. All right, Mel, so we are recording this at the end of a week in which there were two competing documentaries released about the infamous Scott Peterson case. You had a Netflix documentary that leaned very heavily in favor of Laci Peterson's family and her point of view. And then you had a Peacock documentary that gave Scott Peterson a platform for the first time in more than 20 years to go on camera from prison to profess his innocence and to poke some holes in the prosecution's case. Very interesting on both accounts, right?
Yes, most certainly. I know I started out with Peacock one way and ended the third episode with, it's kind of interesting.
Cast a little doubt for you, perhaps.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So bit.
Our guest today is intimately familiar with this case. Her name is Donna Thomas. She's an attorney and a former public defender from the Los Angeles area, also an author who has interviewed some of the most high-profile criminals and accused criminals in history, including Charles Manson, Ted Bundy, and Scott Peterson from behind bars when he was on death row in San Quentin. She wrote a book called I'm Sorry I Lied to You, The Confession of Scott Peterson. Donna Thomas, thanks for joining us on the Trial Watchers podcast. Great to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Did I do your introduction justice?
Yeah, it was very nice. Thank you.
Okay. Very good. Melissa, I'll let you start.
Oh, wow. So I watched the docuseries on Peacock. And when I first started, I was like, oh, brother, I don't know. I really felt guilt. By the third, I wondered about all this evidence. And then I see they're only going to test the duct tape. And I feel like if you're going to start DNA testing and open this whole thing back up, why aren't you not testing everything? There's the mattress stuff and, all that. So I was just wondering, what do you think about that, Donna?
Well, I didn't see, in all fairness, I saw the one on Netflix. I didn't see the one on Peacock because I don't have Peacock and I'm not going to get it to listen to him lie because, I know him very well. So, I mean, the testing, the bottom line, even Mark Garagos, his lawyer, before the Petersons hired him, he was on Larry King regularly, January, February of 2003, before the bodies washed ashore, before he was arrested, saying to Larry King, if they find the bodies where he was fishing, he's done, he's toast. That's what he said. If I'm his mother, I'm not hiring him once he said that. But for some reason, either they didn't see that episode, they felt, oh, this is a really good lawyer to have for my son. I mean, that's a crazy thing. That's the bottom line here. There's no evidence that the two people that did the burglary, who immediately took lie detector tests and passed, there would have been some evidence that they went to the bay, because no one's questioning that he was at the bay. That's not in dispute. He was there and he was fishing there. So the family does not deny that. So he was there. So that means whoever did it, if it wasn't him, had to take her body there. And by the time the alibi was revealed on TV, the place was swarming with cops, with search crews, with media. They would have been caught immediately. No one bought they checked who bought a fishing license from the whole state for that marina. Only Scott did. He's the only one that bought a fishing license, because you have to have a fishing license to get the boat into that water. You can't just do it any other way. You must have a fishing license. So he was the only one that lived in Modesto that bought a fishing license for the Berkeley Marina for the 24th of December. The only person. So how do you explain that then?
Wow.
And they checked the whole state. I mean, if you don't think they did checking, that's what they sat there and they did. And also that was in 2002, 2003-ish, the end of 2000. He had a cell phone. Laci had a cell phone. Everyone had cell phones. There would have been some evidence of the other two going to the marina. They had to have a truck, a boat, all of that stuff. And what are they doing while they're waiting for an alibi to be revealed? So they're sitting in front of a TV and they're watching, and is Laci's body next to them? Is she alive? Is she dead? Where is Laci when they're waiting to hear the alibi? Because they would have had to have that information before they went up there. And they kidnapped her, and they didn't kill her, because normally in all the crimes that I've worked on, they kill somebody there's a reason, because she saw them. They're going to kill her and leave her body there. They're not going to have her body with them for days on end and hundreds of miles, 90 miles from Modesto to Berkeley, to the Berkeley Marina. They're going to have her body when they're not going to they're not going to do that. It's completely unrealistic. It did not happen that way. There would be some evidence of their footprints on the route, at the marina. It's crazy to think. And that's the only way that he can be innocent, because he's not disputing that he was there. We know from the boat launch slip he was there. That is the only way that he is innocent. If they did that, if they took her body there, it's impossible. It's physically impossible that they did that.
Wow.
Donna, we'll get into your conversation that you had with Scott in prison, but I want to backtrack a little bit and ask you, how did you first meet Scott Peterson? How did you become involved with him?
We had a mutual friend, and I'm not going to bring that up 20 years later. I don't think they need to be, bothered with all that. And that's how we met. And, he was up there, and they said, this was, while he was under, suspicion, before he was arrested. And they said to me, I think that there's a really good chance they're probably going to arrest Scott, whether they find the body or not. So maybe you can look into it and help him with some research. So that's how it started initially. So I started working with him before he was even arrested.
Wow.
And what was your reaction when he was arrested, based on what you knew at the time?
Well, we knew he would be arrested. That's the likely suspect, right? The number one cause of death for a pregnant woman then and now is homicide. I don't know if you know that. That's the number one reason why a pregnant woman. So why is that? Who would have motive to get rid of the pregnant woman? The husband, the boyfriend, somebody. I mean, it happens. Sadly, it happens all the time. And people say, well, he wasn't that stupid. Well, the smart ones don't get caught. He was stupid to think that he could do it. Smart criminals don't get caught. It's the dumb ones that are in prison.
Wow. Speaking of prison.
The stupid ones are in prison.
Yeah. So speaking of prison, during the Murdaugh trial and the hearings and all that I attended, I just by happenstance and the way that people filed in and were seated, I was pretty close a couple times to Alec Murdaugh. And then, of course, after the trial, I went and had a bailiff give me a tour of the courthouse and sat in the cell where he was. And it was just such a heavy feeling in his presence. In that cell, it just was just so heavy. I just really can't
Very
explain
depressing.
it. Yeah, it really
it's depressing,
is.
and especially when it's someone that that's sitting there.
Yeah, what was it
think,
like?
Why are they sitting here? And also San Quentin, where he was up until about 2 years ago.
Scott. Yeah,
San Quentin has a no hostage policy. Do you know what that means?
No.
So that means if the inmates take over the prison, then the state of California and San Quentin, you can't sue them if you get hurt or you're dead, and your relatives can't sue them because they don't negotiate. They don't try to negotiate to stop it. They sit back and they let it play itself out. So you have to sign a waiver every time you go in there. It's psychological warfare. You have to sign a waiver that if they take you hostage or you're dead or you're injured, you can't sue anybody or you can't go in.
Wow. So what was it?
So
like
that's
20
what
years
San
ago?
Quentin has. That's what we're dealing with here.
What
And
was
then
it like?
that before Newsom put a kibosh on the death penalty, I mean, there was the East Block there where they hadn't performed it in a while. I mean, while Scott was in there,
Mm-hmm.
okay, while Scott was in there, they executed another person that I interviewed quite extensively, Stanley Tookie Williams, which was the founder of the Crips gang in LA. He was the founder of that gang. So he was one of the last two people that were executed there at San Quentin. And Scott was in the prison. I mean, he was already there when he was executed. He was there on death row, and I believe 3 people were executed while he was there, which is a lot because they don't execute a lot of people in California. It's the largest death row in the United States, and very few people were ever, like Richard Ramirez, which is the worst. I mean, he makes Scott look like a Boy Scout, look like nothing, and he was not executed. He stayed 30 years and died of natural causes. So very few people are actually executed, even before Newsom did that. There hadn't been an execution in 15 years when he tabled it. So it's
Donna,
not like
what was it
Florida
like?
or Texas where they were regularly executing people.
Right.
But it was a horrible thing for him. I know that it was, because he's sitting there, he's on death row, and there are people being executed. And then there was Michael Morales, which was another one that was supposed to be executed while Scott was there, but at the last minute, he got a stay, so he was not executed. So there was almost going to be 3 people. And then the last one that was executed, I can't remember his name, but he was like the oldest one ever to be executed. He was like in his late 70s. He was in a wheelchair. He was on a breathing machine. They took him in with all that, and they still executed him.
Yikes. Well, what was it like when you sat with Scott, and why did you think?
Well, I had been there before
that he was
to deal with other inmates. First of all, Scott was allowed to have contact visits, which means you're in the cell with them and they're not handcuffed and there's no barrier. You can give them a hug when they walk in the cell. You can give them a hug when they leave. You're allowed to sit right there with them. So that's the kind of visits they have to be analyzed to make sure they're not violent. Like Richard Ramirez was not allowed to have contact visits because he was a very, very violent person, even to his own lawyers. So he had to go behind glass. But Scott was allowed to have contact visits. So, and because I lived, more than like 300 miles away, I had 5-6 hour visits with him at a time.
Right.
They allow that when you live far away. His family too, they lived in San Diego, and because it's Northern California, they also had 5-6 hour visits with him too.
So
that's a
what
long
made
time
you
to
think
sit
it
in a
was
small
innocent?
little room with somebody.
What made you think he was innocent?
I didn't know. I mean, the evidence was really bad. Well, first of all, he was 30 years old when he was arrested. He had no parking ticket, no criminal record, nothing. He was as polite as he would want somebody to be polite. He had impeccable manners. He was smart, or so I thought he was smart. He's not really very smart, actually. The common sense button is not there. But you wouldn't think someone like that, he came from a very nice family. You wouldn't think someone like that would be capable of killing their wife, but that's who's the most capable, to be honest, in a lot of ways, because they don't want their life disturbed, That's what it was. I thought he was innocent because he was telling. I'll tell you what. I said, Scott, you can tell me if you did it, and I'll still try to help you because I don't think your trial was fair, and I don't think the trial was 100% fair. But I'm thinking he had an unfair trial, but at least he was guilty. And it's not an innocent person having an unfair trial. Morally, that's the way.
What was it about the trial that was unfair, Donna?
Well, there was so much pre-trial publicity. There were big billboards right there in Redwood City, right across the street from the courthouse, that said "man or monster," and he's in handcuffs. I mean, how can you get a jury pool? I think with the advent of the internet, it's almost impossible. It used to be before the internet that even if you heard a little bit about the case, you would not be eligible. They throw you off. They can't really do that now with the internet and with the way the laws are. I mean, in England, you can't get on TV and say somebody's guilty before they're convicted. You're not allowed to do that. But here we can do that. And we can talk about all the evidence. I just don't understand how someone can have a fair trial when there's that much publicity and people are dissecting the case, every tiny little thing, before it's in court. There's something wrong about that on its face, in my opinion.
So you're
that's why I think
Scott.
Jury members are watching TV before they're summoned, right?
Sure. So you're
Unless
interviewing
you lived
Scott.
in a cocoon. I mean, that was a huge. They were talking about it for. He wasn't
Everywhere.
arrested until April. So was it
Sure.
5-6 months of day-to-day coverage before
Front
he's
page
even
international
arrested?
news.
Yeah, so that's why it wasn't fair, in my opinion.
So at what point during your conversations with Scott did you flip a switch and say, okay, I didn't know before, but now I think he's guilty. What did he say to you?
Well, there were little things before I actually knew that he was good, but now I was starting to question because he was lying about stupid nonsense. Things that you wouldn't even think. He's a chameleon and he's a sociopath. So he tells people what they want to hear. Now, this is really stupid, but I'll tell you. So I'm a registered Democrat. He knew that. He knew that I was very active in the Democratic Party, would campaign for different people. And so we talked about, oh, me too, and blah, blah, blah. I'm a Democrat. But after the fact, I learned that he and Laci were both registered Republicans. Okay, now that's just an example of the kind of stuff that he would lie about. Now, it's stupid, right? I would not talk to him if he said he was a Republican. I mean, that's insanity, We're all entitled to do what we want here. We're all grown-ups. But to lie, it's a little thing. But if you're going to lie about a little thing, you're going to lie about a big thing, too. That's the way that works. Just the level of lying. Now, there was a period of time where Rochelle Neese, one of the jury members that they called Strawberry Shortcake. Do you know who I'm talking about?
She's the woman with the neck tattoo who was interviewed. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, this was after he was convicted. He's at San Quentin. So I was sitting at home. I was watching the Today Show. And there was a little blip that said, Rochelle Neese, one of the jury members, is writing to Scott Peterson at San Quentin. All right. And I was scheduled to go to San Quentin the next day. So they didn't have the letters. They didn't have her on. They just mentioned that. So I went to San Quentin and I said to Scott, Scott, I saw on the Today Show that you're writing letters to Rochelle Neese, the jury member. Is that true? I think that's a great idea. Maybe she'll talk about some jury misconduct, that they were talking about the case outside of the jury room, and that could be an appellate issue. Is that true? Are you writing letters to her? He goes, oh, no, I don't have her address. Well, they said, she wrote to you. She can find your address. She knows where you are. No, absolutely not. Just another one of the media lies. Okay. So I said, okay. So I put, then the next few more days, I saw in People magazine that there was an article about her and that she was writing letters. And I looked at the letters and I knew that was his handwriting because I know what his handwriting looks like. So I knew he lied. That was where I got the title of the book. The next time I went to San Quentin, it was maybe a few weeks after that, after I saw the letters. As soon as he came into the cell, he knew I knew by that point. He said, I'm sorry I lied to you. I said, why did you lie? What is wrong with you? I said that I'm trying to help you here. And if you're going to lie, I can't help you. We have to know where the landmines are. And he said, well, I didn't think you would appreciate me. I'm not your mother. You can write to whoever you want. And I told you it was a smart idea if you were writing to her. But the lying is a problem, that you lie about stupid stuff. Why do you lie? It was like second nature to him to lie. He was a terrible, pathological liar, I came to learn. Not about everything, but a lot of things he lied about. So so before he even slipped, the lying started to pile up.
What
where
did
I
he
had
slip
doubts.
and say? Well, I'm curious what he slipped and said.
Well, the boat launch slip. So every time I went there, I used my time wisely. We talked about a different part of the evidence so that because I'm doing my research. So that day, we were talking about the boat launch slip, the receipt that he was at the Berkeley Marina on the 24th of December. You get a receipt when you pay the money, the receipt. That's what we were talking about. I said, the police are going on and on. This is before he's arrested. We're going back and talking about pre-arrest. I couldn't believe the way they were showing your truck and they were saying, where were you? And if anybody saw you at the marina to come forward. Well, they knew you were at the marina. You showed them the boat launch slip, right? They knew you were there. They knew what your truck looked like. I said, I thought the better thing, they should have been showing Laci's car and asked if anybody saw Laci that day driving the car or where she was. I would have thought that would have been a better thing to be zeroing in on rather than your truck when they knew where you were. And he goes, yeah, and you wouldn't believe what I went through. I took the boat launch stuff, I put it in my pocket, I put a safety pin there on my pocket to make sure it wouldn't fly out. And then when I got to Livermore, which is a town in between Berkeley and Modesto going back, when I went to Livermore to get gas, I made sure that it was still there. I was so paranoid about that boat launch stuff, and then I knew right then and there that he did it, that he was guilty. Right then and there, I stopped talking when he was going on, and I just sat there for maybe 5 minutes without talking, and he didn't talk either because he realized that he slipped, and I knew he slipped.
Elaborate on that. I'm curious. What about that? But what about that statement alone made you believe he didn't come out and say, I killed Laci?
Why would you care? This is before he gets home. Why would you care about the boat launch slip? Why would you make sure it's not coming out of your pocket? Because it's his alibi. He knows she's dead. He just killed her. Well, he killed her before that. That's how I knew. You see the thinking. I mean,
I see your point, but he never explicitly said to you. He never explicitly said, I killed Laci.
No, he did. He did. But he knows I'm not an idiot. I don't understand why why didn't you just get a divorce, Scott? What is wrong with you? Because I hated her and I hated her family. That's another thing. A lot of stuff. I didn't see it in anything that I've seen about Scott. I've done a documentary too for Lifetime. I don't know on him. I don't know if it's going to come out or if it's going to air, but I did. I filmed it in Dallas at AMS Studios. But when I talk about the case, I talk about things that nobody else. Like, for instance, he's an atheist. I've never heard anywhere anybody say that he's an atheist, and I think that's very important because he doesn't believe in heaven and hell, no consequences. I think it's very important that he doesn't think you're dead, nothing happens to you after you're dead. That's what he believes. And I think that's very important to see what kind of person that we're dealing with. You know, they're going to do a documentary. We'll do it then, for God's sakes. Things that they do these documentaries, they give you a little tiny bit of information, but they don't give you all of it. He didn't like her family. And the way I've always seen it, they got along and everything was wonderful. And that's just not true. And he was cheating on her the whole time that he was involved with her. And I think Laci's mother knows that. Laci's mother knows about one or two, but I believe she knows that. I don't see her saying it, and maybe they don't want to disparage. It has nothing to do with her, but that's another reason why I didn't think Amber Frey was enough of a motive, because I knew he was always cheating on her. You know,
so Laci, on a point blank though, what did he say to you point blank about the murder of Laci?
He said he didn't want to be with her anymore. Yeah, he didn't want to be with her anymore, and he didn't want to be around her family. He hated her family.
But you're saying he said I killed her. You're saying he said I killed her.
Yeah, he said he strangled her. He put her in. I said you strangled her, right? Because there was no physical evidence. There was no blood or anything in the house. So I knew it was a soft kill. I knew that. I said, you smothered her or you strangled her, right? Yeah, he said I did. And I took her up to the boat and up to the marina. I put her in the boat and I came back. And that's it. He said,
well, I want to point out to our listeners.
He said, you're not going to tell that to anybody, are you? He said that. I said, no, I don't know. I'm sitting in a cell with him. So, what am I going to say? Knowing that he just did it. So what am I going to say?
So I need to point out to our listeners that Scott Peterson has vehemently denied that he ever did say this to you. So I want to make that clear that he
can deny it.
To this day, he says he's innocent. But I got to ask you though, Donna, if you were there in the capacity of his attorney, shouldn't there have been attorney-client privilege that you wouldn't be able to divulge?
Friend. I was never his attorney. I wanted to make that clear because then I wouldn't be able to write a book if he confessed. I was never.
And he knew that. He knew that when he told you this.
Yeah, he knew. He hasn't sued me. He's read the book. He hasn't done anything. He hasn't sued me. He says he never said that. But he said, if you look in the book, you can see the letters where he's actually saying, I didn't say what you thought I said. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with my ears. I know what you said. Sounding that there's other things to, excuse me, Melissa?
No, I was just going to say, speaking of the book, I did have something for you. I know Neil and I faced a lot of criticism for our alignment with ourselves with Becky Hill, the clerk of court in the Alex Murdaugh trial when we wrote our book. What has
Yeah, I
been what's been the reaction to your book? I'm sorry I lied to
I
you.
mean, some people believe it, some people don't, and that's fine. That's with any book that somebody's going to write about a case like this. There's because most of the time these books take a certain side the way they're writing it, you know.
Right.
I mean, and I'm not nice to anybody. I mean, there's Anthony Flores wrote the foreword to my book. He was the presumed father of Amber Fry's daughter when Scott met her. She had a young daughter, like a 3-year-old named Ayana. That was his daughter's name. And Anthony Flores was believed to be the father. It was her old boyfriend, and he was paying child support and doing all that, visiting her and doing all that. And then I thought, when I was talking to Scott, I thought, why didn't they? Because she hated her. He really didn't like her. They had a very bad breakup, Anthony and Amber. And when I said to Scott, why didn't your defense call Amber to call Anthony Flores to the stand to discredit Amber? I was trying to help him. I was looking for things that could be used as an appellate issue. And he said, I don't know. And so I thought I need to find Anthony Flores and talk to him and see if Garagos or any of them actually went and interviewed him and talked to him and to let him testify. Because it turned out that Anthony Flores was not her father. They did a DNA test and it was another man named Adam Bunch. He's the father of Ayana. And she had to give him back all that support money and everything. So that's why I thought he would have been an excellent witness to testify, to talk about her character. You want to try to do some character assassination against the witness that's testifying against you, right? But they never called him, and that's why I got him to write. So I went through a lot to find him because Anthony Flores is a common name. It's not an uncommon name. So it was very hard to find him, but I found his mother, and I said to the mother, I'm doing some research on the Peterson case, and I want to just know if I know that Anthony is not the father, and I'm sure he's not pleased with some of these characters, because she said terrible things about him as well, that he was a deadbeat dad, and he wasn't even the father. And she's saying these things about him. So I found him and we met. He's a hairdresser, very nice man. He had to move. He moved from Northern California. He moved out of there because he, of all of the backwash that he was getting. But he wrote the foreword to kind of talk about what he went through, because it affected a lot of people, this case. His name was dragged through the mud too. So my point being that I was trying to help him initially, trying to find holes in the case and things that he could use, whether he was guilty or not. There still has to be certain things done. And, Anthony said, I went to the police immediately and I told them I'm the father, because that was before he knew that he was not the father. He said, I'm the father of Amber's daughter, because he thought that he was, and I have a lot of information about her if you need it for the investigation. And he gave his name and his number, and no one ever called him. He said he was working in his hairdresser shop, and he was always looking at the door, paranoid that the police would come in and serve him with papers, and it never happened. So that's an issue too on appeal, in my opinion, that he was never called. It has nothing to do with his guilt or anything. It just has to do with the way that the trial was handled.
So Donna, I mean, his alleged confession to you, and we'll let the viewers decide if they believe it, notwithstanding, this is still a circumstantial evidence case. There was no physical evidence that tied him to the crimes. And that's part and parcel of the appeal that the LA Innocence Project is mounting now, is there's all of this evidence that they say should be tested to identify whether there are other players involved. And when we interviewed Mark Garagos at CrimeCon in Nashville, let me finish. He said that he really was ineffective counsel because he felt like the prosecution was kind of hiding the ball, and there were a lot of things he didn't know existed, such as the fact that there was this burned out van. So how do you kind of reconcile the two when you've got all this evidence that is
none of it matters?
Why don't they, if he did it, then why don't they just test this stuff and unequivocally say,
because it's very hard.
There's nothing on there that exonerates.
Yeah, I'll tell you why. Because it's so very hard to overturn a murder conviction. And you say there's not, like people say that, I think there's a huge amount of evidence. I'll tell you some other things. I'm sitting there, I'm talking, and this is before that I knew he's guilty, or that he told me that he was guilty, or that he slept, or however, but this is before I knew. And he's sitting there and he's talking about, I don't understand how the wiretaps could have been used as evidence against. Because in California, as long as one person knows the call is being taped, they can use it. And she was working with the police. They're allowed to use it. No, because I just think that's so unfair. He doesn't say, I didn't do it. He's talking about the evidence that crucifies him. He never said, I wonder what happened to Laci. I wonder who really took her. I said, some people think that even back then, and that was 20 years ago, I said, some people think that maybe the burglars had something to do with it. Oh, no, they had nothing to do with it. He himself said they had nothing to do with it. Because that's the bottom line here. All this other evidence, and the ban was tested years ago, and there was no conclusive evidence in there. The ban has already been, everything they're asking about has already been tested. It's all lies what they're doing. All of what they're saying and what they're doing is nonsense. It's all been tested. And that tape was on top of her body when it was found. It could have lobbed onto her body while her body was on the shore before the dog walker found the body. While it was there, from the wind, a piece of tape could have got there. If that piece of tape, I can guarantee you 100% had nothing to do with anything. It's probably a piece of tape that was there along the shore, and it could be anything. It could be any little thing, but it has nothing to do with anything. And you'll see that when they test it, you'll see it has nothing to do with anything. They would have to have clear evidence of somebody else doing it, not just little bits and pieces to get him a new trial. It's very hard to overturn a murder conviction, a first-degree premeditated murder conviction. And the premeditation that was involved here is just astounding. People say there's no physical evidence. Oftentimes there's not. When somebody kills, they're trying not to get caught. They're trying to cover themselves so they don't get caught. Most murder convictions, 95% of them, it's circumstantial evidence. If you're talking about hundreds of pieces of circumstantial evidence, that's enough there. What about the phone call that he made on December 8th to Amber Frey saying that this would be the first holidays without? I think out of everything, that's the worst right there. He didn't kill her yet until the 24th. She was still, but he knew that he was going to kill her, and it was safe to say this was the first holidays without it. That's going to be used if he gets another trial. They're going to play that tape again. How do you override that piece of evidence? That's evidence. That's him talking to her on the phone, him and her talking. That's physical evidence.
True.
I got to ask you, Donna.
Not hearsay, he and her talking about the crime.
Yeah, you're obviously passionate. I don't
know how you overcome that. I go, why did you say that? I even asked him, why did you say this would be the first holidays without her? Because I didn't want her to think that I was married currently. But right. You didn't want her to think that you were married currently. And then he goes, because she's confronting me after Sean Sibley told her that she found out that I was married. So I had to do something, because if I didn't tell her something, Sean was going to go to her and tell her that I was married. So that was the only thing I could think of. I said, but it wasn't going to be the first holidays without you. He said, I already told her that I was going to be traveling in Europe and I wouldn't be around her on the 24th. And then what about the next year? Or what about the next Valentine's Day in February, right around when the baby was due, by the way, February 10th, which is Amber Frey's birthday, which I think is kind of weird. Did you know that? The due date was February 10th, which is Amber Frey's birthday.
You're such a trial watcher.
Yeah, isn't that weird?
Yeah. What? Speaking of trials.
And yeah, I said, what would you do Valentine's Day? You're supposed to be with your wife. She would have had an infant. How would you have explained Valentine's Day? He said holidays. I said holidays. That covers all the holidays. Right. I said, but you would have had to be with Laci, though. Your baby would be an infant and it would be Valentine's Day. You wouldn't have been able to be with Amber on Valentine's Day. I would have figured that out. I mean, the lies were just overwhelming, the amount of lies that he told. It was nonstop lies with him. And it just was not the behavior of someone that was innocent either. That he never asked while we were sitting. And we were sitting there hours and hours. Now, not one time did he say that I wonder who took her. I wonder why they did this. He didn't say that because he knew he did it. That's why. And he was saying that he hated Amber Frey.
He hated Amber Frey.
Yes. He
the
hated
fact.
Amber Fry. Well, of course
After-
he did. He didn't know that she
Right.
was taping the calls for the police, and 90% those calls is what convicted him, saying
Sure.
romancing her and doing all of this stuff, and the wife is missing. You would have ended it right there. If you really didn't do anything, okay, it's bad that you're having a relationship, but if you really were innocent and you wouldn't still be talking to her anymore at that point. You would stop. So there was a lot. There was just a lot. Everyone around me, like my husband and anybody, my friends, they said, I don't know why you think that he didn't do it, because he is so guilty. And you're going to just look foolish if you continue to say that. He's like, I said, I'm not saying anything. I'm talking to him and I'm researching and I'm investigating. I'm not saying anything right now.
Yeah.
But everybody around me that knew that I was dealing with him said he's guilty. There's no way that he's not guilty.
Is there anything he said to you during
Another
those
thing,
many,
too,
many
he didn't
hours?
like her family, and I think that's also very important. And there's just a lot of things that they don't talk about. Even the date was premeditated, because Scott's grandfather, his maternal grandfather, John Latham, was murdered Christmas time in San Diego, not that year, but many years before. He had a tire shop that he owned, and during a botched robbery, he was killed. So the 25th was very sad for the mother, because it was the day that her father was murdered. So you figured, it's a screwed up day anyway, so it wouldn't matter. It's not like I'm screwing up a totally different day. It was a mess anyway. It was a very sad time that day. See, I never hear that being discussed, that his grandfather was murdered on the 24th.
I was not aware of that either. Yeah.
Yeah. We're probably of a lot of things. I mean, he was at Arizona State when he graduated high school, where he played with Phil Mickelson on the same golf team. Did you know that? They were very good friends, the two of them. He was a very accomplished golfer, Scott. And he was at the University High School in San Diego, which is a Catholic school, but he was there because they had a very good golf team. And then he went to Arizona State on a golf scholarship, and he got a girl pregnant, and she had an abortion, and he transferred because he didn't want to see her anymore. And then he went to a community college back in California, and then he went to Cal Poly. He was 3 years older than Laci, but she graduated 2 years ahead of him because he lost so many credits doing all of that. And then she lived in Prunedale, California, which is up there in Northern California. She was selling wine, and he was still living at Cal Poly in an apartment with roommates and cheating on her like he was a single person. He cheated on her the whole time he knew her. So that needs to be said also. That's one of the reasons why I didn't look at Amber Fry as a motive, because he was always cheating on her. I didn't think anyone.
So I know we're talking about Scott Peterson, but we want to broaden it a little bit and ask you about your experiences in general in the true crime genre. Melissa had a question for you about that.
Yes,
Melissa.
Melissa.
Yeah. So what are the, because you're such a trial watcher, the most interesting things from other known criminals that you've interviewed? What are some of those, like Charles Manson, Ted Bundy? What are some interesting things?
Charles Manson, I occasionally would work on his, once in a while I'd go work on his appeal or look at his case. And one time I asked him, he was at San Quentin, but then when the death penalty was commuted for a certain period of time in California before they brought it back, so then his sentence was life without parole, and he was transferred to Corcoran. That's where I would see him. I didn't see him at San Quentin. I saw him at Corcoran, which is also up there in Northern California. I asked, he had fan mail and letters and a fan base of people from all over the world. It was amazing with him. Groupies and people that just were obsessed with him. I used to see, what's the guy from Guns N' Roses? Axl Rose would go up there and visit him. Saul Hudson, I used to see him a lot up there visiting him. Saul Hudson is Slash from Guns N' Roses. They used to go up there and they recorded some of his songs. And I used to, and he was in minimal security. Sirhan, the one that they say killed Robert Kennedy, is still in that prison, that same prison, Corcoran. And but he was very free. I mean, he walked around. He had a garden that he did, with vegetables that he tended to. And I said to him, Charlie, if somebody came to you and they said, bingo, bango, the jail cells are open, you can leave, would you go? He goes, no way. To do what? I get 3 square meals a day. I smoke pot in here. I eat my vegetables. I have fan mails, wedding proposals. Why would I go out there and try and I'll probably get killed as soon as I walk out the gate. He said, I'm protected in here. He said, the only thing you can't do in here, they don't have in here is children and animals. Anything else I want, I have it. That's what he said, which is kind of interesting, I think. He was very, very smart. And, another thing about him is that he didn't seem smart. I don't know if but when you sat down and there was no cameras and there was no dazzle and nobody was looking at him, he was a very sane, rational person when you sat down and talked to him. And he actually took out books in San Francisco. He would check out books on brainwashing, because you have to remember that the kids that he had that were in the family were Stanford grads and Berkeley grads. They were very smart kids. So in order to brainwash a smart kid like that, you've got to be really smart yourself. So he would read books ferociously about the art of brainwashing. I mean, he actually took out books. He had the plan for the family for years before he actually implemented it. So he was a very smart, calculated person. Why he was going to do all that kind of made no sense, because he wanted to have a race war and do all that. It wasn't really necessarily to enrich him with money. That made no sense. That was kind of delusional, maybe from all the drugs he did. I don't know.
What was it like sitting across from a guy like that, or a Ted Bundy, who
I was used to
the pinnacle of evil?
You have to divorce the crimes from the person in order to be able to do that. And you have to be very open-minded as a public defender to get people to talk to you and to trust you. If you go in there and you say, you're a dirty pig, why'd you do this, and that? You can't do any of that. And you have to just look at what they're saying, look at their background. I mean, he had a terrible childhood. If you want to look at it from that vantage point, he had an awful childhood. I also interviewed Eileen Warmos, the lady serial killer. I interviewed her in Florida when she was on death row. I felt she was one of the only ones that I really felt very, very sorry for, because when you look at her background and the way she grew up, there was no other way that she was going to turn out. She was set up to fail. 10 years old, 11 years old, she was already prostituting herself, had no home, was living in Michigan in the freezing cold outside in the snow. I mean, she was just a throwaway child in many ways. And actually, she was very smart when you sat down. That's the common denominator with a lot of them. They're very, very, very smart. And another thing I noticed about all of them, most of them, they have a very nice handwriting. You know how you read somebody's handwriting and you can't read what they're writing because it's so sloppy? And I think it has something to do with their need to be in control. If they're writing, they want to be in complete control. Really nice handwriting. Scott, all of them have very nice handwriting, which I think I've never seen one that has bad handwriting that I've dealt with. Now, that's kind of interesting.
So I don't have a future as a serial killer because my handwriting is impossible to read, and my wife would tell you that. So
well, that's
clearly I don't have it in
me.
Or July 9th birthday. That's a very bad birthday. Did you know that? Scott doesn't have July 9th, but July 9th. Lots of murderers have that birthday. You wanted the list? O.J. Simpson, Amanda Knox, Stephen Avery, Making of a Murderer, July 9th. Chris Porco, the Romeo killer, killed his father, tried to kill his father, July 9th. And there's a whole bunch of other ones. Courtney Love, I mean, she's never really been convicted of anything, but I think she's kind of crazy. That's July 9th also. I mean, isn't that interesting? If somebody has that birthday, I just run for the hills. July 9th
My birthday is, no, I'm just kidding.
Is it July?
So Donna,
9th?
what's your next project? What are you working on now? You got another book coming out?
Thank you. I'm working on a case in New Mexico about, I've been writing a series of articles. It was a terrible case here. It was in Albuquerque. A 10-year-old girl, her name was Victoria Martin. She was murdered on her 10th birthday. Not only murdered, but dismembered and lit on fire and rolled up in a rug. So that's the case. But the thing with that case, I'm writing about all the police misconduct that was involved in it, because that's it. But nobody's actually even been convicted of her murder. They made deals with the one that actually did the murder to testify against. I've interviewed everybody. I interviewed all of the defendants. It was the child's mother that basically was because she was negligent and she didn't look out for her welfare. Not that she did any of it. She didn't. But she let people in. And then one of the other persons, and then the male, Fabian Gonzalez. And then he has an older brother, Fabian Gonzalez, named Joseph Gonzalez, that was involved in a road rage killing in New Mexico. He yelled at somebody to go and slow down. He was driving through his neighborhood. He came back. He said, "What'd you say?" And he was killed. And Joseph is still in prison, in jail. He was. So I'm writing a book about these two brothers and their cases and the way the police handled the investigation, which I think is terrible, the way it was done. I think it was a lot of guilt by association because that was his brother and, that kind of thing. So it's going to be called Tale of Two Brothers. That's the working title right now. And then I have another book that I'm also working on about women that kill, all the women killers that I've interviewed, which have been many. So it's going to be I'm going to feature 50 different women in there and their murders and why they kill and all of that kind of thing. Because it's not, women don't kill, men, it's, a lot higher the rate. It's very few women percentage-wise that actually kill. It's much higher. So I think it's a good subject to dive into why they kill and what motivates them. And a lot of times a man is involved in the killing, which I know. A man will kill on their own. They don't have to have any other person involved. But with women, a lot of times you'll see that there was a man involved in the killing, which I find very interesting, like a boyfriend or something,
And
so
when
I think
can we expect both those projects
to explore?
Yeah, when are those projects going to drop?
The women that kill, I still have three more women that I want to interview. I've interviewed, Leslie Van Houten. She was a Manson girl. She was just released last year. But I've also interviewed Patricia Kremwinkle, the other one, who's still in prison. She's the longest serving woman in Maine. I've interviewed Pamela Smart, the one that was accused of killing her husband, Greg Smart, in New Hampshire. I interviewed her. I've interviewed a lot of them. But I have three more because I want to have 50. So I've interviewed 47 for this book. So until I interview the last three, that one. But the other one will be coming out with the brothers in 2025. Tale of Two Brothers. That's the working title.
Wow. Well, we'll have to have you back on the
be published
podcast.
By UNM Pratt. UNM, the University of New Mexico, has their own publishing division. So that's who's publishing that one because it's a New Mexico case.
Got it. Well, let's give you the last word on the Scott Peterson case as we wrap up here. We know that this is probably going to be appealed to a higher court beyond what happened there in Redwood City, so they can get this evidence tested somehow, some way. What's your final word on whether he gets out?
Yeah, well, they have agreed to allow that piece of tape to be tested, and it will come back, and it will have nothing. It will have it probably won't have Scott's DNA or anyone's because I don't think it has anything to do with this. In the end result, it will be that he dies in prison. That's what's going to happen to him. He's not getting out. He would still have to, if he had another trial, which is very unlikely, it would be the same evidence. It would be him telling Amber Fry. And, people look at you and you're lying left and right constantly. You're just not likable. He's not a likable person when he's sitting there. And that plays a role. It shouldn't, but it does. It's human beings sitting there judging, right? They judge. And he's sitting there and he's lying and he's romancing the mistress and the woman. That set of facts, he can't get a pass. And that's going to convict him if he had 10 trials. He'd get convicted every time, which is good because he's guilty. So he needs to die in prison. And he needs to stop bothering. I feel so bad for Sharon Rocha that this has to keep coming up and she can't have any peace. It's very unfair, in my opinion. He should just be quiet. He knows he did it, and he's just shut up now already at this point. He did it. Right. Like the saying goes, if you don't want to do the time, don't do the crime. And he did the crime, and he's going to die in prison. The only way he's getting out is in a box. That's the only way he'll get out. A pine box or whatever box they elect to put him in. And it's really sad.
Parting words from Donna Thomas.
The whole life was an oyster for him. He could have done anything he wanted, and he chose that. So it's his own doing. He did it. It's his own fault. There's no one else to blame but him.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, Donna, the author of a book called I'm Sorry I Lied to You, the Scott Peterson, the Confession of Scott Peterson. And again, we'll let our listeners and viewers decide if they believe
And
that
it's
he
on
did
Amazon if people want to buy it.
on Amazon. Yeah, you can find it on Amazon, and she's got a couple.
It's on
very interesting
Amazon,
topics
so if
coming up.
someone wants to buy it, it's there.
Yeah.
Thank
fantastic.
you. Thank you, Mike.
Thank
and
you, Donna.
Melissa,
Nice
for
to see
having
you.
me.
We
I
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again for joining us on this episode of the Trial Watchers podcast. This is a show about true crime fans for true crime fans. To learn more about us, go to trialwatchers.com, where you can buy our book and join the Trial Watchers crew, which is our private Patreon page where you can get some great true crime content released pretty much every day, every week throughout the month. For now, I'm Mike Pachenik.
Melissa Gordon.
We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Devil dropped the gavel on that little coastal town.